All right, today we're going to be talking about some of the effects of the Industrial Revolution, and you're going to want to write each of these down and we'll discuss them in turn. First effect is laissez faire economics, which means hands off. Also leads to the rise of big business, the factories that we know today, a totally new class structure. First in England, but then elsewhere as the working class becomes more powerful, and you also have a powerful merchant class. Urbanization, people moving to cities, deplorable bad working conditions, a changing of social roles, and eventually an improvement in the standard of living and transportation. Okay, so laissez faire economics. Before the Industrial Revolution, Europeans followed a policy of mercantilism, which called for government regulations such as tariffs to achieve a favorable trade balance. This was basically the way that the colony system worked, where the home country or the mother country took from the colony, and the colony provided raw materials and then got finished goods in return. During the Enlightenment, a theory of laissez faire economics, which we will discuss in more detail later, emerged. And this theory argues that business should be allowed to operate free of government regulations. And in 1776, a man named Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, which is kind of the original textbook or the original plan for capitalism, which is the type of economic system that thrives in this country and pretty much throughout the world anymore. Capitalism said the economy should be governed by natural forces of supply and demand and competition among businesses. Okay, you begin to have out of this new industrial things, in the industrial revolution, a rise in big business. All the new technology that we've already talked about comes the need requires a large investment of money in these businesses, and to get it, the business owners would sell stocks or as shares in their companies to people who wanted to invest and make money. Each stockholder would then own part of the company, and this allows business to expand. Okay, you also have a new class structure. In the Middle Ages, you basically had two: nobles, who owned all the land, and peasants, people who worked the land. In the 1600s, a middle class begins to emerge as you begin to have more of a city class. During the Industrial Revolution, it becomes much, much more complex. Yet the upper class is no longer the wealthy landowners, it's the rich, very rich industrial and business families, and they often marry into the nobility as kind of a cash cow for the nobility. And then you have a growing upper middle class consisting of lawyers, doctors, business professionals. These people are often called bourgeoisie, which is a French term for middle class. Their standard of living is very high, and below them you have a middle class of lower middle class, which is teachers, office workers, shop owners, and clerks. And at the bottom of the class structure are the factory workers and the peasants. So basically, instead of just having the lower class being people who worked in the fields all day on the farms, that's now the people who worked in the fields all day and on the farms, and also the people who do the life on the factory floor. They face harsh working conditions, and they live in overcrowded cities. You may remember from your American history of the late 19th century the conditions that prevailed. Okay. Urbanization, working conditions, changing social roles. People move out of their small villages because of the agrarian revolution that we talked about the other day. Towns, and they work in factories located in cities. The cities are very overcrowded and unsanitary. London, basically everything just had a film of black coal dust on them from all the coal that was burned to run the factories and heat homes. Factory work hours are long. Men, women, and children all work between 12 and 16 hours a day. Mass production methods led to work that is very boring, and many of these machines were dangerous. Again, you probably should remember some of this stuff from your study of the Progressive Era in the United States. Uh, Social roles of men and women change. On the farm, men and women work together. Under the new industrial society, the workplace and the home are separate. Men work at the factory while women usually worked at home, though not all. Upper middle class children had a chance of being educated, while lower class children did not. They went to work. And women often worked in factories and then cared for their children after work. Transportation and standard of living gets better, not for everybody, but for most. Roads and canals are built and improved. The steam locomotive is invented. Railroads grow, and steam engines power shipped at sea, so things get places much, much faster. The rich lived in pleasant neighborhoods, while the poor lived crowded into slums and city areas near the factories. In time, these conditions will improve, but people also had improved diets and medicines and became healthier because of the agrarian revolution. There's more food availability, so people can eat better. Okay, bad effects of the Industrial Revolution. Conditions in factories and mines are often very dangerous. You have child labor. You have women treated poorly, working extra long hours. Very low wages. There's no benefits, no vacation, no health insurance, no nothing. You worked long hours, 14 to 16 hours, 6 days a week, because Sunday was the day you went to church. The living conditions are terrible. People have poor housing, often 12, 15 people living in a small space. There's poor sanitation. There's really no modern sewers or things like that like we think of today. And that leads to poor health. And there's very little medical care to take care of that health, if there's any at all. Okay, so you begin to have reform legislation in Britain. We're going to talk a little bit about this over the coming days. The direction of the reform is in a lot of different ways. You have a move towards greater human rights, towards representative government, towards universal suffrage or the right to vote. You begin to have the beginnings of workers' rights movements and a movement for greater education. So in 1884, slavery is outlawed in all the British colonies. That should actually read 1784. 1832, representatives for British industrial towns. So they begin to get some representation in Parliament. And in 1858, they take away the property qualifications for members of Parliament. In 1911, the House of Lords is abolished. Or at least voted out of any kind of power. In 1829, Catholics get the vote. In 1867, the vote goes to all working class men. 1884, votes for farmers and everybody else. And in 1918, you begin to have women voting. 1825, trade unions are legalized. 1840s to the 1920s, they gradually get rid of child labor. They regulate work hours. They regulate pay. You start to have minimum wages, and you begin to have accident and unemployment insurance. And then finally, to improve education, you have local elementary schools run by elected school boards. And by 1902, you have state-aided secondary schools and public universities. And again, this is in Britain. The United States will follow, but at a slower pace. Okay. Impacts of industrialization leads to global migrations. Okay, you have improved transportation, faster ships, faster trains, faster everything. Population growth and a lot of the social and political conditions of Europe and elsewhere lead to people leaving their homes and heading for the United States for jobs and freedom. Okay, you had the Irish potato famine. Under British rule, the Irish grow crops as wheat and oats for the British, but the Irish eat only potatoes. That is pretty much their crop. In 1845, disease destroys the crop and the Irish are starving. The British refuse to help out. They continue to take the food crops out of Ireland. 4 years later, there's another potato failure. 1 million Irish starve to death. Millions more migrate to the Americas. Global economy begins. The economy that we have today that is so intertwined really got its birth during this time frame. As they competed for resources in markets around the world, imperialism developed. Okay, some of the social results of this: general population increase, a rapid increase in urbanization, the growth of cities. The role of women changes. They have more money, which means they have more power. And family patterns change. You went from an extended family with aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents all living in the same house to a more of a nuclear family, which is just father, mother, and children. And they become more mobile. People begin to follow the money and follow jobs. Okay. Leisure time becomes more available. Now, this takes a while. Education becomes more available, and as it does, more people can read, so literacy increases. They begin to have social welfare programs develop. Health and safety levels increase. Communications and transportation also improve. Negatives, as I said before, pollution is a huge problem. London the skies are just black with coal smoke. You have a loss of natural resources because they go through it like crazy. In areas you have overpopulation. The dehumanization of workers, they're treated like they're a dime a dozen. And you have several different economic systems developed that we're going to talk about going forward. Okay, so What I want you to do for me is to turn in the next after tomorrow, three effects of the Industrial Revolution.